54 African nations are joining together to create a new trade bloc worth, it is thought, $3.4 trillion. Will it be a game changer for Africa? Welcome to Roundtable. Well, very good to have you along. I'm David Foster. So, if the new Africa Free Trade Area works, it could help to harness the purchasing power of 1.3 billion people to push the continent, it is hoped, into a prosperous new era.
The world's largest free trade zone came into force after a long wait. This year, 54 African Union members gathered in Niger to sign the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. It aims to create greater economic integration by removing trade barriers such as tariffs. The agreement will create a $3.4 trillion economic bloc, which it's hoped will lead to a new era of development. But some analysts are worried that it will not succeed. Among the challenges, overlapping tariffs, poor infrastructure, and terrorist groups that threaten several regions. So is the African Free Trade Deal a big deal for the continent?
Let us introduce the guests at this edition of Roundtable now. Fabien Beugre, African banker and the founder of Granatum Finance. We have Olusiji Sanya in the studio with me, economist and co-founder of Tranzfar, money transfer services. And then we go to Africa itself, Somalia and Mogadishu. First of all, on the left here, Dalmar Kanyare, an expert on trade, a managing partner at Horn Horizon Consultancy, and then to Abuja, the capital of Nigeria, Kingsley Okeke, group managing editor at African Leadership magazine. Thank you, each one of you, for coming on the program. Let's start in Africa, first of all. And Dalmar, I wondered if it was going to be a game changer at the beginning. I know you believe it definitely will be. In what way?
First of all, Africa for the first time has undertaken a really gargantuan program by starting this free trade area. From the perspective of Somalia, this is exactly what we needed to start boosting up the sort of economic recovery that we're seeing right now. It improves the business case for multi-million-dollar investments in the transport sector in Somalia. It moves the business case from serving 12 million Somalis to be able to serve the larger catchment area of 120 million people. When you look at it from the perspective of South Sudan, Ethiopia, northern Kenya being able to import from ports in Somalia. It simplifies trade, and it's another pillar around which Africa can come together and start taking advantage of the demographic reality we're facing now and in the future. Okay. Africa is a young continent and an ambitious one.
Kingsley, let me come to you. In Nigeria, yes, it sounds great on paper. It's taken a long time to get to this particular point, but it is not going to come cheap. Hundreds of millions of dollars are going to have to be put into this to make it work. There are promises. Will the money be there? Will it happen?
Thank you very much, David, for the opportunity. And of course, it took Nigeria about 4 months to sign up to this, the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, because we understand that the government took a long time to, have some engagement with stakeholders, understand in details how it's going to benefit the country, what are the costs, and as opposed to the benefits and all that. And of course, in terms of the investment, yes, it's going to be there because I think the government finally have come to terms with the fact that they should really be driving the process in the first instance rather than taking the back seat. But be that as it may, they've signed up, and we are hoping that the investments needed to drive the initiative from the home front here, even though I have my reservations, still has to be made available.
But we'll talk about the practicalities of it in just a moment. But Fabien, you are a banker. And with all these grand schemes that we've seen around the world in the last 20, 30 years, money is promised, but it doesn't always appear. Now, is this definitely going to happen? We're talking about 2020, I think, when it is supposed to come in. That's very, very short notice for all the regulatory bodies, all the rules to be drawn up, all the statutory, all of the stuff that required to make this work.
No, definitely. Money is promised. Yeah, you got Akim from AFDB at
African Development
Bank. Bank announced, billion of fund that going to be added on this for this project, especially to finance SMEs, because I think who is going to be the big winner.
I'm an acronym man on this program.
SME, sorry, small and medium enterprises. Who is a big winner of this free trade is going to be the small and medium enterprise, really, because for them it will open a large market from the north to the south.
So from Algiers down to Cape
Town,
from Beugre across to Mozambique.
Definitely.
There will be no trade barriers, that guaranteed?
A reduction of trade barrier, sometimes no trade barrier, but more important, SME have to be funded. Trade have to be funded. So when you take Afrexim Bank, which have been set up for trade internally on the continent, Afrexim Bank has a big role to play here. And actually, the president of Afrexim Bank announced recently, Professor Benedict Orama, announced recently that they set up a digital payment, a settlement platform for trade in Africa. And that definitely we need to encourage that.
In practical terms, Olusiji, you're involved in money transfer for people who want to send money back to Nigeria in particular. But in practical terms, looking at it from the SME's point of view, looking at it from service industries, what practical differences is it going to make? Goods moving through the continent will find it that much easier, transport companies and so on?
So, if what is on paper actually happens, yes, it should create frictionless trade, payments. Obviously, goods have to be paid for. But again, I think it's a question of whether the ability to execute all these things is possible in the time frame. If you ask me, I'll say you need about a 10-year transitional period to be able to fully deliver. You're looking at things like payment systems, transport systems, communication systems.
You say 10 years, and how long are they reckoning?
They're talking about 2020. So
we're talking
about 1 year to 18 months. But I think we need to learn from, obviously we have something similar going on in the in the EU, and you can see how they've diligently created institutions and framework. For example, in Europe you have SEPA, which allows almost instant payments to be done across the system. You need a lot of time to set up these things. You need to pilot them. So I think 2020, in my view, is not realistic. And this is one of the risks.
Okay. Can I jump quickly?
Fabien.
So 2020, we need to understand that 2020 is really the implementation on the border, that is going to be a political implementation, let's say, each state going to apply. But the effectiveness, the benefit we're going to see from this trade is going to take a long time. In Africa, we need good roads. We need railway. The railway system has been built in Africa to export goods, to export raw material from Africa. Now we need to have railway in Africa, actually, to transfer internally in Africa, not from the production to the port. Now we need to go from country to countries. We need to be able to transfer raw material from, let's say, South Africa, maybe in production somewhere in Congo, etc., vice versa. But we need to have an internal infrastructure.
So I'm going to go to the guys out there waiting very patiently and just say, regarding what Fabien has just said, if trade increases as much as is suggested, it will have come a very long way from today when only, and this is quite unbelievable, isn't it, only 16% of trade within Africa is from one African country to another. Only 16%. Dalmar, are you on that one?
It's a figure that's always surprising to everybody. Although if you've spent some time in an African border town, you would understand the level of bureaucracy and how tiring it is to do the most simple business transaction. But fundamentally, I do agree with the whole issue of there going to be a need for a very long implementing period. The political decision might be made by 2020, although I know several countries are yet to ratify it in their parliaments. They might have signed on during the conference headed by President Kagame, but the whole element of ratifying the agreement by different parliaments is still still yet to happen. The other issue is beyond the issue of funding, which I feel that, as usual, Africa is still depending on perhaps promises and resources from outside the continent. There's this whole element of the AU and the agreements being reached there being very opaque to the majority of Africans. There have been some very good initiatives that came out of the AU previously, including NAPAD, the African Peer Review Mechanism, and all that. Very few people know anything about it, and you don't hear what's happening so much unless you're very technocratic and involved in that as your daily bread.
Kingsley, I'm going to have to move it on a little bit, Dalmar. I just got to move it round to Kingsley and say, listen, one of the problems that there's going to be is there will be a massive bureaucracy. It should ease up a lot of things, oil a lot of the wheels of industry and trade, et cetera, et cetera. But who's going to be there to make sure that the money doesn't end up in the wrong hands?
It's part of a problem, really, that, and I quite agree with, Olusiji in the studio there. Implementation will have to be a very big issue. Regulatory frameworks and all that would have to be set up. Right now, it stands. We don't see some of that kind of urgency, as it were, to have people in place and begin to have the right conversations. And if we don't do that immediately, it might suffer what, the ECOWAS trade liberalization agreement that was set up, since 1979 or thereabout. And
I should point out to our viewers that is the West African States Economic Partnership, a smaller part of the African continent, which was already together, ECOWAS, yeah.
Yes. It hasn't quite been very fruitful. If you look at it in the real sense of it, very few people know, very much about that particular agreement. And of course, because of the kind of level of engagement that there was, at that level. Some business people actually are not taking advantage of that because they truly don't understand. We've had some very good engagements and conversations with business leaders across the continent.
Yeah.
And they don't have a grasp of what that entails.
So there will be problems. They can be anticipated to some extent, but I suppose I need to ask you about Nigeria in more detail because of the lateness of its decision to go along with this and the fact that Eritrea is no longer part of this. But the bigger question, 1963, we saw the foundation of the Organization of African Unity. Why on earth has it taken this long? And I'll posit why. It's because Africa is so many different countries and nobody can agree on anything.
Yeah, well, a trade agreement of this nature takes a lot of. It doesn't just happen overnight. If you ask me, I think it's even. There's been no. I don't think there's been enough comprehensive engagement. If you ask me, because like you said, like you rightly pointed out, Africa, 54 countries, different tribes, different persuasions, tongues, and everything. So there's a lot that has to go into planning. A project of this magnitude. Look at the fact that you want to service a 1.2 billion market, and the fact that you're trying to increase from 16% to pursuing 52%. It's quite a very comprehensive project. So you can't just it doesn't just happen.
Hang on a second, Kingsley. Olusiji wants to say something.
Just trying to intervene on that question. There are kind of two theories as to why Africa is just waking up to it. So on the one hand, you have the theory about a few sort of emerging African economies, i.e. your Ghanas and Kenyas, who are working very hard. They're structurally smaller, but they feel that with this on this kind of platform, they can punch better above what they're punching right now.
And as a corollary to that, would you also say, therefore, that South Africa, perhaps, and Nigeria did not need to push for this? They didn't see the need because they were preeminent.
Well, yes, and I think that's probably one of the theories around why Nigeria was a bit reluctant.
Yep.
Because this default giant of Africa position, without much effort, is a sweet spot to keep. But obviously, when you're put on a platform where you now need to fight for that position day by day, it might scare you off. But the second theory is a bit more external. And there's this rumor, paranoia, that this drive for the deal is more external and is sort of, the Western world sort of wrestling Africa back from China. There's this idea that in the last 7 years, China has been sort of having its way in the continent, and this is a way to kind of, wrestle it back. So there's a lot of theories around why now.
Because Chinese investment in so many different African countries
that is correct.
has become a major financial and political talking.
Very correct.
How would this
Can I-
balance things out? Yeah,
Can I jump on it? Yeah. When we look, I think something we shouldn't forget, look the population of Africa. Yeah. With 1.3 billion inhabitants, close to China soon. So that is a key point. You got the cumulative GDP is $3.3 trillion. So with a market of 1.3 billion, inhabitants, it's now key for us actually to have our companies, our local producers, our small and business enterprise, to have this market open to them to do trades.
I get it. Is there going to be
but to do that, sorry to interrupt you, to do that is not just moving, because here we are talking about free trades, but good doesn't move alone. You have to be movement of people as well. You have been movement of workers as well. And that has a key point we need to look at. Thanks to Ghana, Ghana just opened the free trade, the free visa for Africans. But I think many other countries have to follow that. We only have...
Hopefully it would be pretty much every single one of the 54, perhaps then 55 countries that it would be part of.
But at the moment, we got only 25% of the African country. We give visa at the border.
Can I ask a question here? Yeah. Which is, can you foresee difficulties in terms of conflicts between countries that are vying to have the biggest infrastructure projects to make this work? Let's say the road from Angola across to Dar es Salaam, or the road from Algiers down to Angola itself. I mean, do you see?
But you have to be a regional. You have to be a regional play. So, for instance, in West Africa, they are talking about the road going to cross many different countries. Correct. And building the motorway, the railway in that region. So it will be a regional program that they have to put for the infrastructure, but as well in terms, because here we are talking about internal supply chain, for Africa. I think we need a certain point in order to avoid too much competition between those countries, because that's what we're going to have. We need.
So you're going to need some sort of intercontinental
competition.
Yeah,
there certainly will be, because a lot of them have their different sort of interests. Because don't forget, this kind of structure, some industries that are thriving in some countries right now will potentially be decimated by this agreement.
Well, such as?
I mean, some small sort of, in some countries that are very sort of, small farming based, you will see big, efficient commercial farms from other sides of Africa being able to sort of wipe out their market share. And we need to consider these realities, how to palliate these people, mitigate these things. I mean, it's already quite an unstable region, in quote. And when you have this kind of...
So do you think this could actually change the nature of Africa?
I think it will. And I'm not saying that's a reason not to go ahead, but I'm saying that's something to consider and have a solution even before we start.
So Kingsley, if this changes the nature of Africa as a continent, in what way could that happen, and would that be for the good or the ill?
It's going to change the nature. Of course, it's going to change. It's already beginning to shift. Conversations are beginning to shift from what it used to be. So it's going to change a lot of things. It's going to actually call to question the issue of confronting the issue of integration. Imagine having to travel from Nigeria to Accra, and would have to battle with the issue of currency conversion. You travel from Kenya to a place like maybe probably Tanzania, you have to also battle with the issue of currency conversion. So we want to have to begin to have that conversation around properly articulating, addressing the issue of movement of people from place to place.
Could it lead to conflict, do you think? Because as multinationals move around, as their influence grows in certain countries, lessens in others, the idea of national borders with Africa is pretty fluid anyway.
I think it's true. Now we are talking about, we are celebrating this agreement, but we need to see what's going to happen in the future. When we talk free movement, when we talk about free movement of population, of people, that means free movement of workers as well. So that means social dumping. that you could imagine. Just think about the European Union, where you have the Polish come to work in UK, or you have you always name the Romanian go to work in Italy and vice versa. You create some competition internally with the local that exists already. It's all these things that we need to prevent. So we need to learn from some of the unions, especially the European Union, and see what went wrong there, and make sure that it's not going to happen in our countries.
So your suggestion is that perhaps the European Union went a bit too far with the free movement of people rather than just the free movement of goods, and perhaps it should have stayed based on the individual nation state more than it was on one entire bloc.
Yeah, but how you can avoid
can't be avoided.
How you can avoid free movement? How you can do free movement of good without doing free movement of people? You have to look. Imagine you move from. Let's say you got a truck driver go from South Africa, from Cape Town to Algiers. Yeah. How many countries you have to cross?
8.
You have to cross 9.
8.
Let's say.
Okay.
9 countries. 9 borders you need to go through. That means 9 visa. You need to apply 9 times for visa.
So you say
how much it costs for that?
You have to have free movement of people. Kingsley, you wanted to say something.
You can have a free movement of people or free movement of goods without the involvement of people. It's people that will actually begin to engineer this trade that we're talking about. That's on the other side. And we also need to begin to shift conversation on the issue of the infrastructure. Infrastructure is a major problem that is going to hamper the smooth implementation of this noble, idea. And look at the issue. You will agree with me that we need over, I think, about 93 billion annually for the next at least 10 years to be able to build sustainable infrastructure across the continent. Looking at the figures and what we're investing currently, you begin to have some kind of it begins to you have a bleak, some kind of perspective about what's going to happen eventually. But yes, it's going to change the dynamics of what's going to be happening in the continent, and it's going to help. Of course, most of our founding fathers they've always pushed for Africa to punch as a group rather than as entities. That's why they started to talk about unification, started to talk about having to move as a bloc and all that. And it's happening now is because I think we're beginning to realize that that's the only way we can compete favorably with other regions and other continents, across the globe. But how we implement it is absolutely important. How we follow through with the process. Let it not be like what some of the issues we've had in the past where things get bogged.
We don't have a great deal of time left, so I'm just going to put this one out here because you bring up the idea perhaps of a bloc that becomes, if not political, then slightly more than just a road from north to south. Are we going to see eventually the end of currencies in Africa? Are we going to see one great big bloc?
On paper, it sounds like that. But again, I think we're, a long way away from that. Even I remember there was the idea of the ECO in 2009. There was supposed to be this West African
which was part of the ECOWAS, the West African
system.
currency.
Yeah. Implemented in next year, actually.
Well,
they are.
It's what they announced. They want the ECO to be live next year, but
it's not going to happen.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And who knows? How do you implement that even in ECOWAS, talkless of the whole of Africa?
We're getting ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's still very far-fetched. We need to sort out the basic version of it.
But you think it will work?
I personally am not a proponent of it as of for now. I think we need to see the trade deal 1.0 live and kicking first before we start talking about political union, single currency, and all the other stuff. And I think one bit that is very silent in this debate is the external facing bit of the deal. So we're all talking about how to make it work within Africa, but how is Africa going to deal with the rest of the world in terms of trade? That's something.
Well, I know somebody from this country who'll be queuing up to talk to somebody who from that's our new prime minister who's got to get us out of Brexit and into
we can come back on the currency side. Yeah, I don't think having multiple currency will be an issue. It's true, we got 33 currencies on the continent. Probably we need to have some less currency, maybe combine some of them. But the main issue, I think the solution will come probably from the digital sector.
Exactly.
What Afrixim is doing is quite key. And I think we need to follow that closely because Afrixim is putting in place a payment and settlement platform for Africa. Even in the West African country, where, the ECOWA, if we call it, if you want to move money, if someone transfer money from Ghana to Benin or from Ghana to Ivory Coast, it's going to have enormous charges around it. Maybe even the transfer will go in UK or in Europe before get transferred to next border.
I'm sure it was, because
and it will take 48 hours.
The more places it stops, the more people make money out of it.
Exactly.
Listen.
So the digital is the key. I mean, the digital sector is the key for
Fabien,
that.
thank you very much indeed. Thank you so much indeed. And of course, your money transfer business is flourishing at the moment. Let's hope it continues to do so with the new African trade deal. To both of you in Mogadishu and also in Abuja, our thanks for joining us on a Roundtable. Next year, they say it could happen, free trade across Africa. But the first baby steps have been taken with all but one of the countries there saying they think it's a pretty good idea. We'll see. Thank you for joining me, David Foster, on Roundtable. For now, goodbye.